Mike Tyson, Roy Jones Jr., and Nate Robinson and Jake Paul. Let's talk about them. What's happening, boxing fans? It is Dr. Bring It. So what's going on, people? Did you guys happen to catch some boxing this past weekend? Well, if you haven't, I'm sure you've seen on social media a lot of stuff, a lot of smack talk about this past weekend. Let's first talk about Roy Jones Jr. and Mike Tyson meeting up in the ring. Mike Tyson being 54 years old, Roy Jones Jr. being 51 years old. These two iconic boxing legends met up, and we caught a glimpse of what actually could have happened had they met up in the ring at their best. Now, obviously, Mike Tyson, I think it's the general consensus that Mike Tyson did win. But since this was an exhibition match, I think that's probably why they gave it a draw. I had a feeling that they were going to give them a draw anyway. But clearly, Mike Tyson was the one who came out, wanted to really box, gave Roy Jones Jr. a couple of touches to the body, and showed Roy Jones Jr. why he is one of the greatest heavyweights of all time. Roy Jones Jr. after the fight was saying already that the reason why he was clinching so much was because he had to survive. He said that everything he did, even when connecting with Mike Tyson, hurt his hands. Mike Tyson touched him to the body. That hurt when he clinched him, and Mike Tyson was connecting some punches, even some rabbit punches. That even hurt. I think if they met up in their primes, Mike Tyson would have absolutely annihilated Roy Jones Jr. Roy Jones Jr. would have had to employ the same strategy that he did against John Ruiz, if you guys remember that fight. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong here, but Roy Jones Jr. came in a little bit under 200 pounds when he met up with John Ruiz, and we saw a lot of this tactic and strategy, which was tying up John Ruiz pretty much the entire night. He stayed on the outside, tapped him a couple times, maybe hit him with a couple of good combinations, and then clinched up just to avoid getting bumped up to the body especially. Again, Roy Jones Jr. coming up from like the middleweight, fighting heavyweight, he had to employ this because he's not a natural heavyweight. Mike Tyson, on the other hand, complete monster, was born pretty much a natural heavyweight, agile, had the footwork, I'll tell you, Mike Tyson is a lot more technical. What people realize, he was not just a brawler. The guy was a masterful tactician that really specialized in strategic and tactful knockouts. The way he set up everything. And I don't know if you guys really saw this. Usually, when getting clinched up, usually he just like pushes off just enough to get room for a right hook to the body and then right uppercut. He didn't do this against Roy Jones Jr. I think obviously because he just wanted to box. It was an exhibition. He wasn't really out there to truly kill Roy Jones Jr. He was just, again, his gratitude came out. I think both of the fighters' gratitude came out afterwards. They were just so happy to be out there. They are truly legends of the sport, and you could see how much love that they have, not only for the sport, but for each other, how much respect they had for each other. I think it was really a true it was a true gift to boxing fans to see this. Now I'm looking forward to seeing maybe Mike Tyson come out and do an exhibition match with Holyfield, get him out there, see a lot of these greats coming out again. I think Mike Tyson had already made it clear that the sport has been kind of like in the shadow of MMA in the last several years. We do see an uptick because of these young guys coming up, especially in the welterweight division and below, like the Teofimo, the Tank Davises, the other young guys, the Garcias, these guys are up and coming, and they're really lighting the sport up again, if you will. And for me, being a longtime boxing fan, I love the fact that these older guys are coming out there. They're showing the youngins, and all the boxing fans out there, they're showing like what it really takes and the true passion of the sport. I think it's really good for the sport overall that these older guys are coming out, and I don't mind it at all because again, Mike Tyson's one of my all-time favorites. If anything, my all-time favorite heavyweight, and maybe even over Manny Pacquiao. Being Filipino, Mike Tyson really was the fighter out there when I was a little kid watching him. I just, all hats off to both Roy Jones Jr. and Mike Tyson. Let's talk about Nate Robinson and Jake Paul. Now, I thought of it as a non-boxer stepping into the boxing realm. Now, mind you, Jake Paul is a YouTuber, but again, correct me if I'm wrong here, but Jake Paul has been training for some time now. Now, again, he was 1-0 going into this fight. Now he's 2-0, so he's technically undefeated, right? But I believe he was training for this. Now, I think Nate Robinson was also training as well. But let me just make a comment about this. You can go in there into any kind of sport. Forget about professional sports, okay? Just any type of sport. To achieve a certain mastery of anything, 10,000 hours is that's kind of the gauge, and how much you really achieve, how much proficiency and mastery have you achieved, and whatever it is that you're trying to focus on. Now, Nate Robinson, obviously, he is an elite athlete. I believe he was a football star throughout high school and maybe even in college. And then he crossed over to basketball, and he's obviously one of the elite basketball players out there as well. So his achievements in sports, no one, only a very small percentage of players out there can achieve what Nate Robinson has achieved as any type of athlete. But what I find is very humbling. Now, again, in fight sports, especially in boxing, boxing is it's an art form. It is the sweet science. Now, for anybody, forget about Nate Robinson, just anybody to come in and think they could go in there and dominate anyone with relatively minimal training is kind of delusional a little bit. Now, I give it up to Nate Robinson to even step into the ring, okay? And same thing with Jake Paul. I mean, he's putting himself out there as well, okay? But he also knows, he had more experience than Nate Robinson. He knows enough that he had to train his butt off to make sure that he got the win. Now, he definitely got the win, but what it showed, he knocked out a guy that pretty much has zero experience. Now, when you're going into this realm of boxing or even fight sports, you have to understand that when you're in there and you start to tire, what takes over is just pure adrenaline and just your primal instincts. You can throw away all tactics, you throw away all strategy, you throw that all aside. And what happens is it's just your natural instinct that takes over. And you're no longer a boxer unless, of course, you train for it. Now, let's talk about amateur boxing. Amateur boxing, that's the time where you're like building your muscle memory. And like I said, that 10,000 hours is significant because what you're doing in those 10,000 hours, you're building up a routine. You're building up your muscle memory. When you're punching someone, okay? Let's say you go for a jab and you see a glove coming at the same time. Your instinct is to close your eyes. Nate Robinson, as you saw before he got really knocked out, he was just lunging in and just throwing. And I bet you he was closing his eyes. You know why? Because that's what you do naturally when you're untrained. When you didn't build that muscle memory to come in, coming in, instead of lunging in, you're coming in kind of like also guarding yourself and protecting yourself from being caught going in. Nate Robinson was just pretty much just bum rushing like as if it was a bar fight because that's what tired and hurt fighters do. So did he come in unprepared? Well, in his own mind, he probably trained, but in his own mind, he trained enough to be prepared. But what happened is that he didn't train long enough. Okay. Now, was this good for the sport? I think it's good to the sport because in the marketing world, there's no such thing as bad publicity. It's just publicity. So, does it put more eyes to the sport of boxing? Yes, it actually does. Now, do I recommend that all these non-professional fighters start to go out there and start boxing in front of a camera? I don't think they should. Now, let's put this in perspective. There is no better place for Nate Robinson and all these non-boxing professionals. There's no other stage that would be safer than a boxing ring. You know why? Because there is a referee that's professionally trained to protect both fighters. And then also when the knockout does occur, these professionals, they know to come in and call the medical staff to engage them. Nate Robinson, I didn't see him get carried out, but it took him a long time to get up. Now again, the knockout or what really hurt Nate Robinson wasn't the actual punch itself. It was after the punch when he face dove into the canvas. That's what juked him even more. The fact that him and I don't even know how much he weighs, 200 pounds probably, hit the canvas pretty hard. Is it a laughing matter? Yeah, we all can laugh about it. But if that was our relative or our brother, it wouldn't be a laughing matter. If that was like your boyfriend or, your significant other, like hitting the canvas that hard, we would be very, very concerned about that. But yeah, we all can laugh about it. But at the same time, when you really break it down, it's just like that's not a good position to be in. And it is pretty concerning. Now, mind you, did that juke Nate Robinson's brain? Did that cause long-term effects? It could have. It could have. We don't know. Only Nate Robinson now and his medical team would know what kind of long-term effects it can have. So to go back real quick, is this good for the sport of boxing? All of these exhibition matches? It is good for the sport because it engages the casual boxers or the casual boxing fans out there, and it puts eyeballs on it. But it also kind of it starts the discussion of what does it really take to be a professional boxer. Now, that is why it is so hard to call these fights, to call who can win and who doesn't. That's the reason why, for me, I try to stay really unbiased and I really look at the fighters' movements, their footwork, their stamina, what they do under pressure, what they do in deep water, how disciplined are they, how good is their body punching, how good are their movements in making combination punching. How good do they counter punch? Are they counter punchers? Like all of these things, there's so many things that go into great fighters. And these are the things that I look at. Now, obviously, when you're an amateur fighter or a non-amateur fighter like Nate Robinson, and even Jake Paul, you have to ask these questions like, what kind of training did they obtain those 10,000 hours to even call themselves an amateur? Maybe not. Again, just to give you guys an idea, what is 10,000 hours? It's a college degree. It's a 4-year bachelor's degree. 10,000 hours, just to give you some context as to what 10,000 hours is. 10,000 hours is what you need to achieve mastery at a certain subject matter. So just some of those thoughts. Overall, the weekend was definitely eye-opening. We're going to see a lot of Twitter stuff. We're going to see a lot of memes with Nate Robinson laying on the floor. You can't help but to laugh at the memes, but again, it's really no laughing matter what actually happened because he could have seriously have been hurt. Obviously, he was hurt enough for him to not get up so quick. But again, thank goodness this was all done in the supervision of boxing professionals, be it the referee, the medical staff, and all that stuff. So anyway, let me know what you guys think of this weekend. Let me know if you guys think that you were really satisfied with the Roy Jones Jr. and Mike Tyson fight. Let me know what you guys think about the Nate Robinson knockout. And if you think it's good for the sport. It'll be interesting what you guys, what you guys say in the comments below. But just keep it coming. Anyway, that's it. Hope you guys had a great weekend. Until next time, talk to you soon.